The idyllic family life shattered in an instant when the heroine's mother decided to return to her own apartment. Her husband perceived this as an intrusion and issued an ultimatum. "If your mother can come to us, then my mother will move in too." He failed to grasp the obvious. They were living in his mother-in-law's apartment, completely rent-free, and she had simply come back to her own home. The mother-in-law, delighted by this turn of events, had already packed her bags and was heading their way. Hello, dear listeners. I'm delighted to welcome you to my channel. I present to you a new, engaging story. Enjoy listening. The 3-room apartment on Preobrazhenka was inherited by Yulia from her grandmother. It was old, with cracked wallpaper and Soviet plumbing, but it was hers. Crucially, it was in the heart of Moscow, where even a studio apartment cost millions. Yulia worked as a manager at a construction company, earning 70,000 rubles, which certainly wouldn't have been enough to afford rented accommodation. And here she had 3 whole rooms, albeit in need of renovation, but that was manageable. When she met Kirill, she was immediately taken with his openness and straightforwardness. He worked as an engineer at a factory, earning a modest 60,000 rubles, but he was cheerful and easygoing. They had been dating for half a year when he proposed marriage. Yulia agreed without much hesitation. Theirs might not have been a passionate love affair for the ages, but having a reliable, steady, calm person by her side seemed like a decent prospect. The mother-in-law, Rima Borisovna, appeared at the wedding in a raspberry-colored suit and an impressive hairstyle that resembled a bird's nest. She loudly admired the restaurant, the number of guests, and especially the apartment, when Kirill casually mentioned that Yulia owned her own place. "My goodness!" exclaimed Rima Borisovna, grabbing Yulia's hand. "So, where will you live? With you?" "Yes, dear," Yulia nodded. "My grandmother left it to me. How clever. And my Kiryusha was renting, poor thing, in tiny places. Now he can finally settle down properly." Yulia remained silent. Something in her mother-in-law's tone unsettled her, but she decided not to dwell on it. After all, it was her wedding, a celebration. After the festivities, the newlyweds moved into Yulia's apartment. Kirill brought 2 bags of his belongings, hung his engineering diploma on the wall, and sprawled contentedly on the sofa. "Ah, this is nice," he sighed. "Finally, a proper place to live. I was so tired of those rented studio apartments. The landlords demand something new every month. First repairs, then rent increases." "I'm glad you like it," Yulia smiled, sitting down beside him. "Listen, why don't my mother come for a week?" Kirill suddenly asked. She really wanted to see where we live. "For a week?" Yulia echoed. "Well, sure. Just let me know in advance. I'll give the place a good cleaning." Rima Borisovna arrived 2 weeks later with 3 bags of groceries, a box of pastries, and a determined resolve to organize the young couple's life. "Oh, it's so messy in here," was the first thing she said upon crossing the threshold. "Yulechka, you really don't take care of the house. Look at the dust on the chandelier. The wallpaper is peeling, and there's even mold in the bathroom." Yulia swallowed her irritation. "Rima Borisovna, the apartment is old. We're planning to renovate." Well, planning," the mother-in-law scoffed and headed for the kitchen. "Where do you keep things? I'll sort this out now." The week turned into 3. Rima Borisovna rose earlier than everyone else each morning, rattled pots and pans, prepared breakfast, and offered Yulia advice on household management. Every evening she settled in the living room in front of the television and loudly commented on the news. And when Yulia tried to hint that perhaps it was time for her to go home, her mother-in-law would pout with offense. "Am I bothering you? I'm helping, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, and you're ungrateful." Kirill remained silent. He would come home from work, have dinner, watch television with his mother, and go to bed. Yulia's attempts to speak with him privately were thwarted by his exhaustion. "Yul, what's the matter? Mom just wants to help. Don't get worked up." "Kiro, she's been living here for a month already." "So what? Are you stingy or something?" Yulia understood that arguing was pointless. She gritted her teeth and continued to go to work, return home, and endure her mother-in-law's presence. But one day, Yulia came home early and found Rima Borisovna in the kitchen. She was standing by the window, talking on the phone, clearly not expecting anyone to overhear. "It's fine here, Lius. The apartment is big, a 3-room place in the center. Yulka isn't much of a housekeeper. I'm doing everything. Kirusha is happy. I'm telling you, if I try hard enough, I could stay here permanently. Why should I be stuck in my tiny studio?" Yulia froze in the hallway. Her heart pounded. She carefully closed the door, took off her shoes, and went to her room. Everything became clear. That evening, she tried to talk to Kirill. "Listen, your mother has been with us for 2 months now. Perhaps it's time for her to go home?" "Yul, why are you picking on her? She's not bothering anyone." "She is bothering me, Kiro. This is our apartment. We're newlyweds. We need our space." "What our?" he snapped. "Is it yours or something?" Yulia was taken aback. "What do you mean, yours? The apartment belongs to me. My grandmother left it to me." "Well, yes, yours. And I'm just here temporarily then?" "Yes, Kiro. What does that have to do with anything? I'm not talking about that." "Then what are you trying to say? That because the apartment is yours, I'm nobody here, and my mother doesn't belong here?" Yulia looked at him, bewildered. Where did this tone come from? Where did this aggression originate? "I just want us to live together," she said quietly. Together, Kirill mimicked. "Then why does your mother show up here every week?" "My mother visits for a couple of hours. She lives in her own apartment. So my mother should be able to visit too," Kirill stated flatly and left the room. Yulia remained seated on the bed, unable to comprehend what was happening. They had only been married for half a year. How had everything deteriorated so quickly? The following week, the tension escalated. Rima Borisovna felt increasingly confident. She began rearranging furniture, discarding items she deemed unnecessary, and even made a habit of inviting her friends over. Yulia would return from work to find 3 unfamiliar women in the kitchen, drinking tea and gossiping about the neighbors. "Rima Borisovna, this is my apartment." Yulia finally couldn't hold back. "At least warn me when guests are coming." "Oh, come on." The mother-in-law brushed it off. "We're being quiet. We're not bothering anyone." The final straw was the furniture rearrangement incident. Yulia had been saving money for a bathroom renovation, found a good crew, and agreed on a price of 130,000 rubles. She had set aside half the amount and planned to gather the rest by the end of the month. But when she arrived home on Friday, she discovered that Rima Borisovna had decided to rearrange the living room. The old sideboard that stood against the wall was now in the middle of the room. The sofa had been moved to the window, and in the cleared space, her mother-in-law had arranged her potted plants. "What is this?" Yulia asked, stunned. "A surprise," Rima Borisovna announced proudly. "I decided to refresh the interior. I brought my plants here. They'll get more light here." "You moved the furniture without my permission." "Oh, don't grumble. It looks beautiful, doesn't it?" "Rima Borisovna, this is my apartment," Yulia insisted. "You have no right to change anything here." "Ah, your apartment," the mother-in-law flared up. "Fine, I hear you. Mine. And Kirill is my son, by the way, and he lives here. Precisely, he lives here. And are you a guest?" "Ah, a guest. Very well. I'll tell Kiryusha what an ungrateful person you are." And she did. That evening, when Kirill returned from work, Rima Borisovna staged a full-blown scene. sobbing, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, and complaining that Yulia was kicking her out. "Mom, don't cry," Kirill grumbled and turned to Yulia. "Why did you attack her?" "I didn't attack her. She rearranged the furniture without asking." "So what? Furniture is not a reason to have a hysterical fit." "Kirill, your mother has been living here for 3 months. 3 months. That's not normal." "What's not normal? She's helping us." "She's not helping. She's taken over the apartment." "Taken over," Kirill sneered. "What are you talking about, Kirill? This is my apartment. Mine. I have the right to decide who lives here." "Ah, yours," he mimicked, always with the same tune. "I'm tired of hearing it. Maybe I should move out then?" Yulia fell silent. Something inside her snapped. "You know what?" she said quietly. "Maybe you should." Kirill looked momentarily confused, then frowned. "Fine, if you don't need me." He turned and left the room. Yulia remained standing in the middle of the living room, her legs feeling like they might give way. The next day, something else happened. Yulia's mother, Svetlana Fyodorovna, called and said she wanted to stop by. Yulia was happy. She desperately needed support. Her mother arrived on Saturday morning, brought a pie, placed it on the kitchen table, and looked around. "Yul, what's happened here? Has the furniture moved somewhere?" "Mom, don't ask," Yulia said wearily, waving her hand. Rima Borisovna decided to settle in. "Settle in? She's still here?" "Uh-huh, for 3 months now." "Are you out of your mind?" Svetlana Fyodorovna exclaimed indignantly. "Why are you tolerating this?" "What can I do? Kirill is defending her. He says that since the apartment is mine, then he's just here temporarily." "Well, let him move out then," her mother said decisively. "Why do you need a husband like that?" At that moment, Rima Borisovna entered the kitchen. Her gaze flickered over Svetlana Fyodorovna, and she offered a strained smile. "Oh, the other mother-in-law has arrived." "Hello, hello," Svetlana Fyodorovna replied dryly. Do come in, don't be shy." Rima Borisovna spoke as if it were her own apartment. "Would you like some tea?" Svetlana Fyodorovna frowned, but remained silent. Yulia poured tea for everyone, and they sat at the table in silence. The atmosphere was tense. After her mother left, Rima Borisovna scoffed. "Your mother is rather haughty, sitting there as if she's a guest of royalty." Yulia didn't reply, went to her room, and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. In the evening, Kirill returned from work, looking gloomier than a storm cloud. He tossed his jacket onto a chair and walked into the living room, where Yulia was sitting with a book. "Listen," he began, clearly having worked himself up during the day. "If your mother can come to us, then my mother is moving in permanently." Yulia looked up from her book and smirked. For the first time in a long time, she found it amusing. "My dear," she said calmly, "we're living in my mother's apartment for free. She's come back to her own home." Kirill froze. A look of incomprehension crossed his face. "What do you mean, my mother's?" "Very simple. The apartment is registered to my mother. Grandmother left it to her, not me." This was a lie. The apartment was Yulia's. But at that moment, she suddenly realized she was tired of explaining, tired of proving, and she lied. "What are you talking about?" Kirill frowned. "I'm talking about the truth. Mom allowed us to live here, but the apartment is hers. So if your mother moves in, mine might change her mind." Kirill stood there, mouth agape, clearly trying to process the information. "Yul, are you joking?" "No. Go ask Rima Borisovna if you don't believe me, or call my mother." Kirill scratched the back of his head and left the room. Yulia returned to her book but couldn't concentrate. Her heart pounded. She had just told her husband that the apartment wasn't hers. Why? To teach him a lesson? To see how he would react? Or perhaps simply to finally hear silence? The next day, Kirill was pensive, spoke little, only occasionally casting strange glances at Yulia. Rima Borisovna also quieted down. Apparently, her son had told her something. 2 days later, the mother-in-law couldn't stand it any longer. "Yulchka," she began in a coaxing tone, "I've been thinking. Perhaps it really is time for me to go home? I don't want to be a bother." Yulia looked up at her. "Don't worry, Rima Borisovna, you're not bothering anyone." "But you said yourself." "I've said many things, but you didn't listen." The mother-in-law pursed her lips and left the kitchen. In the evening, Kirill tried to talk again. "Yul, listen. Maybe Mom will really move out? I understand she's overstayed her welcome." "Of course. Let her move out," Yulia replied calmly. "Well, that's good. So it's settled. Just no hard feelings." "No hard feelings," Yulia nodded. But a week later, Rima Borisovna was still in the apartment, citing the need to prepare, pack her belongings, and tidy up her own place. Yulia didn't insist, just observed. And then one evening, Kirill came home and announced joyfully, "Yul, Mom is moving in permanently tomorrow with all her things." Yulia raised her eyebrows. "What do you mean?" "Well, to live here permanently." "Kiddo, what are you talking about?" "Everything's fine," he waved it off. "The apartment is big, there's enough space. Why should she sit alone in that tiny studio?" Yulia exhaled slowly. "I see. That's good. She'll arrive tomorrow morning. I'll help her move her things." The next day, as Yulia was leaving for work, Rima Borisovna was already standing by the entrance with 2 enormous suitcases. Kirill bustled around nearby carrying bags. "Yulichka, hello," the mother-in-law beamed. "I'm moving in with you permanently. Now there will be someone to look after the household." Yulia nodded and left without a word. She got on the metro, rode to work, and spent the entire day in a daze. One thought kept circling in her head. This is the end. A marriage less than a year old was falling apart before her eyes. In the evening, when she returned home, the apartment was in chaos. Rima Borisovna's belongings were spread everywhere, in the hallway, in the living room, even in the bedroom. Her mother-in-law was giving orders, directing Kirill on where to put things. "Ah, Yulechka," she turned around. "You're home. Look how we've settled in." Yulia walked into the living room. Her favorite armchair was piled with her mother-in-law's clothes. Strange books and trinkets sat on the shelves. The apartment no longer felt like her home. "Yul, why so glum?" Kirill asked. "You should be happy. Now Mom will help us with everything." Yulia looked at him, at this man with whom she had been making plans just 6 months ago, and suddenly realized she felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, only emptiness. "Kirill," she said calmly, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About the apartment." "Again?" he grimaced. "Yes, again. Sit down." Kirill reluctantly sat on the sofa. Rima Borisovna also sat down beside him, clearly not intending to leave. "I lied to you," Yulia began. "The apartment isn't my mother's, it's mine." Kirill frowned. "What do you mean?" "Very simple. I'm the owner. Grandmother left it to me, not my mother." "Why did you say that then?" "I wanted to see how you would react." Silence hung in the air. "And now what?" Kirill asked tensely. "And now," Yulia pulled a folder of documents from her bag, "I want both of you to leave. Rima Borisovna, I understand you've already unpacked your suitcases, but you'll have to pack them again. You usually take your belongings and leave, and Kirill can go with you. Or rent something. You decide." Rima Borisovna turned pale. "Leave?" "Kirill, what are you doing?" He jumped up. "We were husband and wife," Yulia corrected. "I'm filing for divorce. Are you out of your mind?" "No, Kirill. I tolerated it for a very long time, but that's enough. We are family." Rima Borisovna suddenly began to cry. "How can this be? We're family." "No," Yulia shook her head. You are a family, and I am a person who let you into my home and is now asking you to leave." "Yulka, don't be silly." Kirill tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Tomorrow, I'm going to my mother's. You have 1 week to pack your things. Leave the keys on the table. And if we don't leave," Rima Borisovna challenged. "Then I'll call the police," Yulia replied calmly. "I have all the documents. You are not registered here, so don't try to threaten me." She turned and went to the bedroom. She took a bag from the closet and began to pack. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. Kirill burst in. "Yulia, wait, let's talk normally." "There's nothing to talk about, Kirill." "Yul, I understand. Mom will leave, right? We'll live together." Yulia turned. "Kirill, you haven't understood anything. You still don't understand what the problem is." "Then explain it." "The problem is that you don't see me. You see the apartment, a convenient place to live, free of charge, and my mother, who can live here, but not me." "That's not true, Kirill, and you know it." He fell silent, then asked quietly, "And if I apologize?" Yulia smiled sadly. "It's too late." 3 days later, she took her last belongings. Kirill and Rima Borisovna moved out the next day as soon as they realized Yulia wasn't joking. He tried calling, sending messages, but she didn't respond. The divorce was finalized through court 4 months later, the standard time frame given the lack of consent from one party and the mandatory month for reconciliation. Kirill initially tried to resist, demanding compensation for jointly acquired property, but quickly gave up when Yulia's lawyer explained that the apartment had been inherited by her before the marriage and was her personal property. There was nothing to divide. Yulia renovated the apartment herself. Not all at once, but gradually, room by room. Light wallpaper, new plumbing, simple modern furniture. First, she re-wallpapered the living room, erasing the last traces of Rima Borisovna. Then she tackled the bathroom. The crew worked for 2 weeks, and when Yulia first stepped into it after the renovation, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She stood before the new mirror, looked at her reflection, and smiled. This was her home, her territory. She met Kirill by chance, just over a year later, in the underpass at Komsomolskaya. He was walking towards her, and for a second their eyes met. He looked tired, opened his mouth as if to say something, but Yulia simply nodded and walked past. And he had nothing to say.